Well, yeah, my name's Steve Becker, and I am a lifetime resident of the Buhler community, um, even though I live just outside of Buhler on the family farm. Um, I'm going to try to express my experience with 1W service, and that was 50 years ago. So uh, I will tell it as my memory is today. That's a long time ago, but I certainly grew up in this church, Buhler Mennonite Church, and I really can't define any particular moment in my growing up as a young child and into adolescence, and I really don't know that I didn't have what I would call a spiritual experience or a spiritual um, enlightenment. Um, but in August of 1965, is when I had my opportunity to put my faith to work. And because that is when I turned 18. In August of 1965, I had just graduated from high school here in Buhler, and I had enrolled at what was then Hutchinson Junior College. So at 18, I was required to register for the draft. And in my registration, that is when or where I declared that I was a conscientious objector. And that was certainly putting my faith in action because that is what I had been taught through my church and my faith family and the community. Um, yeah, I knew I was a conscientious objector. I believed in it strongly, and I had no hesitancy of putting that down on my draft registration. Uh, because I placed that on my draft registration, I was required to appear before the local draft board. I think that was, I don't recall, maybe 3 or 4 members of people that lived in Reno County, and they were tasked with determining, I think, whether I was sincere, whether this belief was sincere and true, or whether it was merely an effort to avoid military service. So I appeared before the local draft board, and it didn't amount to much of an interview. As soon as they saw where I was from and what church I attended, they recognized and they knew that this church taught that doctrine. And so it wasn't even a stressful experience. They accepted. They certainly accepted my status, and I was then classified. My draft classification became 1W. So that was certainly how it started. It was in That was in 1965. In 1968, I was drafted. I remember traveling on a bus with other young men to go to Kansas City for my draft physical. Um, that was tough. Everybody was really nervous, and of course, nobody wanted to be there. But anyway, I have a memory of that. Um, because I was enrolled in junior college, they allowed me to finish my semester. So in the summer of 1968, I was required to perform 2 years of civilian service in lieu of 2 years of military service. The people working with, I think it was people from the Western District Conference leadership, I'm not sure, but they kind of oversaw the local 1W service, and they opened up a new program or a new service in Clinton, Oklahoma. And I remember being asked if I had any objections serving in Clinton, Oklahoma, and I thought, well, that sounds pretty good, because it wasn't that far from home. You could drive it in a day. So, yes, I agreed to do that. And it's important in my story to point out this was a brand new program in Clinton, Oklahoma. And I believe there were 3 couples that went to Oklahoma to perform 1W service. Coincidentally, one of them was a classmate of mine from Buhler High School. So that's what we did. Shortly after arriving in Clinton, Oklahoma, it came to our attention, my other 1Ws and myself, that the city was, or that there was a contingent of the city that was not supporting what we did, and we were not welcome. It was a veterans, we were told the city was pretty much run by a certain veterans organization, and once they found out that we were there in lieu of military service, we were told we weren't welcome. Of course, that didn't. So that made us feel unwelcome. We stayed, we did our service, but we tried to keep a low profile, tried to stay under the radar, and I guess these are my feelings. I tried to stay under the radar and just keep my head down and do my job, get my 2 years in, and then get out of there. I worked at Oklahoma General Hospital. It was not a psychiatric hospital like a lot of 1Ws worked at. This was a general medical hospital. I worked in the physical therapy department. That's where I was assigned as a hospital orderly. They had one physical therapist, and not long, a few months after being there, she left, and they didn't hire another one. So as a hospital orderly, I was the physical therapy department. Yeah, I enjoyed the work. But there was always that cloud that I knew. There was always a concern I had that people would find out that I was a conscientious objector. And I wanted to avoid confrontation on that issue. I think I felt ill-prepared to defend my position in not hostile, but in an adversarial conversation. I was glad when it was over. I did the 2 years, so I left in the summer of 1970, and just put it behind me. So, yeah, that's an overview of my 1W service 50 years later. I don't know. I wanted to avoid confrontation. I think that was the most important thing. I don't think I would have needed. I was taught in this church and during catechism and things like that. I think I was taught everything I needed to know to defend the position. I didn't want to have to do that. And I felt, I don't know, I probably felt inadequate to do it, although I had all the tools. I knew it was the right position, but I wasn't sure whether I could answer all the questions or get the ward off the pushback that was coming. So, yeah, I think my teaching told me what I needed to know. I don't know that I wanted to use it just because I wanted to avoid confrontation. I don't recall that there was any. I didn't get into any arguments about it. I don't remember any confrontation. I remember my co-workers, on occasion, it was pretty rare, would ask me about it just because they weren't even aware that something like that was available. They didn't know. It seemed like they didn't know about someone being a conscientious objector and how that affected the draft. So, yeah, they would ask me about it. I would respond to the questions best I can. But it was certainly not confrontational. It was more informative. They were looking for, my coworkers were curious, I think, and asking me for information. So that occurred, yeah. The way the hospital was set up, they had the main building of the hospital, and then here was next to it was a place where ambulances could drive through. It was a covered drive for the ambulances, and then on the other side of the covered drive was kind of an annex. That's where the physical therapy department was. So I didn't spend all my time in the hospital proper. I was kind of on the edge. So I would receive orders from doctors for physical therapy of a particular patient. And usually, if possible, I would transport the patient from the hospital proper to my physical therapy department. And then a lot of my work just had to do with exercises, I guess, strengthening exercises, range of motion exercises. We had a whirlpool bath that was used to debride open wounds. We used that quite a bit. And things of that nature. Just what you would expect any other physical therapy department to do. When someone got a joint replacement or something, we would assist in exercises and strengthening and range of motion. No, we were the only ones there. And we were pretty tight. We would socialize together, and we had it was, of course, it was a small group. There were only 5 or 6. I'm not sure if this one individual was married. Can't recall. But I think there would be like 5 or 6 of us and we formed a tight group. We attended church regularly at the local Mennonite Church, so that was good because we made friends there, and it was like they knew why we were in Clinton and they supported us. So we knew we had that support, that we could rely on if we found ourselves uncomfortable. So that was good. I enjoyed the pastor that we had. And, yeah, that was a good support for being there. But there were only the 5 or 6 of us.
Right.
It wasn't a shock, but Clinton is in the southwest portion of Oklahoma, and that's Indian reservation. And this was a state hospital, a public hospital, so that's where all the members of the Native Americans that were living there, and there were a lot. I mean, there were a lot of Native Americans, and that was the only hospital that was available to them. I guess it wasn't a shock. It was I enjoyed getting to know their culture, and because in Clinton it would be a widely attended powwows of various tribes, and we always enjoyed attending those. So yeah, it was interesting because it was somewhat a different culture than ours. But yeah, no shock or no big obstacle there. I was married at the time. My wife and I became very close friends with another couple that lived there in Oklahoma. They had a Mennonite background and Mennonite belief, and we became very close with them. He was my best friend, and he and I would do everything together while we were there. So that's the warmest feeling I have about it, is having developing this friendship and closeness that we did with this other couple. So that was very cool. Yeah, God, that's a good question. Being older now and reflecting and having 50 more years of faith learning and things like that, I'm so much more comfortable and take pride in being a conscientious objector because I know it's the right thing. I feel much more comfortable with it now than I did when I was doing the 1W service. I felt when I was doing the 1W service, I was a little uncomfortable because I knew there weren't very many of us. I felt like there weren't very many of us. And so I think I tried to hide it. I tried to avoid, like I talked about earlier, I tried to avoid confrontation. I didn't want anybody to ask me about it, and I didn't bring it up. I would never bring it up. So I think I was kind of hiding, but I sure don't do that anymore because I'm so much more comfortable with it now than I was when I was a unsure teenager who didn't know what he wasn't very comfortable with himself, I guess. Yeah. The organization in Clinton was the American Legion, the veterans organization that pretty much ran the town. They were the city government, and the doctors that I worked with were members of the. No, I didn't work with them. I worked for them. The doctors that worked in the hospital were American Legionnaires. The whole 2 years, I don't have a positive spin on it. It was kind of negative. It seems like it just took me out of my life for 2 years. I did what I was supposed to, and then I could come back and continue life. That was like a footnote in my life rather than being significant part of my life. Yeah, I think that's right. I didn't find the experience to be very meaningful or even significant. I just did it and then returned to Kansas as soon as it was over and continued my education. That's what I wanted to do. That 2 years in Clinton, Oklahoma was not much more than a hiccup. Yeah. It's kind of sad, but I think that's accurate.